Hello, fellow Potterheads. Welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale. I am your host, Gabe, and this week we are diving into Chapter 6 of Chamber of Secrets, Gilderoy Lockhart. This is going to be an interesting one, so buckle up. I got a lot of psychology for you. I got a few references. As always, they're going to be in my show notes. But let's get to the recap first. So, throughout this chapter, after Ron and Harry get the hero's treatment for flying the Ford Anglia to Hogwarts. Okay, maybe not with, Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, or Professor Snape, but from their fellow classmates, minus Percy and Hermione. Things don't go well for Harry the next day, the first day of classes. The howler from Mrs. Weasley, Lockhart's weird advice just before herbology when he held Harry back from herbology class, Ron's poor magic with his busted wand, Lockhart again, only this time he's now overhearing Colin Creevey asking Harry for a signed photo, and the Cornish pixies in the Defense Against the Dark Arts. Ron and Harry's first day of their second year at Hogwarts did not go very well. And right away we see that Ron immediately has picked up on Lockhart's bullshit and sees right through him. So this becomes more important later on in the book for those of you who are not aware of the story. But as I said, we are going to dive into the psychology of Gilderoy Lockhart. There's not really a lot that I'm going to connect to my life. So this week we are going to have a psychology lesson. So I did some digging on this. And I utilized my favorite chat GPT tool, Perplexity. Again, all of the references it gave me from actual peer-reviewed studies are in the show notes. So Gilderoy Lockhart's character can be psychologically profiled as exhibiting strong traits of narcissistic personality disorder and aspects of antisocial personality disorder, though without a complete clinical diagnosis in the text. So we're kind of going to put a pin in the antisocial personality disorder. I will be diving into that later in the book. I think I need to make a note for myself because I can think of a couple chapters that will go into. So we're going to put a pin on the antisocial personality disorder for now and focus on the narcissistic personality disorder and another disorder that came up in my research, which I found extremely interesting. Gilderoy Lockhart, displays extreme arrogance, vanity, and egomania combined with a lack of empathy and an obsessive need for attention and admiration. That, in a nutshell, is narcissistic personality disorder. Psychologically, we're getting to the other one, okay? Psychologically, he seems to have developed a grandiose but false self-concept reinforced by excessive praise in childhood, possibly fueled by overbearing or idealizing parental figures. This cultivated deep insecurities masked by his extravagant persona with a compulsive need to fabricate and take credit for accomplishments that are not his. His behavior shows manipulation, deceitfulness, and a reckless regard for the well-being of others, seen in his stealing of other wizards' memories and achievements without remorse. For those not familiar with the story, we are going to dive into that later because basically Lockhart admits all of this. But we'll talk more in detail about those specifics when we get to that chapter. Lockhart, and here's where it got interesting for me. Lockhart also demonstrates elements of the dark triad, as it's known in psychology circles. The dark triad personality traits, which are narcissism, Machiavellianism. I always struggle with that one. And psychopathy, or psychopathy, however you want to put that pronunciation or that emphasis. Charming on the surface, but exploitative underneath, with a pathological need to be seen as heroic and superior. He lacks genuine confidence and insight, and when his facade unravels, he becomes vulnerable and powerless, underscoring the fragility behind his grandiosity. We will see all this at the end of the book, like I said, so stay tuned. We will be circling back to all this to see how it all falls apart for Lockhart. Okay, so in sum, Lockhart's psychological profile is a mix of profound narcissism, delusional self-importance, and antisocial tendencies, all wrapped up in the guise of flamboyant charm and superficial brilliance. This makes him one of the most distinctly toxic and psychologically complex characters in the series. And I could not agree more. I am currently listening to The Order of the Phoenix, the audiobooks. When I go to bed at night, I usually set the timer on my app for 2 hours so I get to go to sleep to whichever audiobook. I am currently on Order of the Phoenix, and we've already seen Umbridge's harsh punishment with the quill. Gonna leave it at that for those not familiar. And I think when we get into the conversations about Umbridge, we're going to come back to a conversation about Lockhart too, and we are going to compare and contrast these two characters, because yes, Voldemort is scary. Yes, Voldemort is a classic sociopathic narcissist. Umbridge and Lockhart, in my mind, and knowing what I know about psychology to this point with my bachelor's degree and my own personal lived experience, Lockhart and Umbridge are a lot more dangerous when it comes to their psychological profiles. And we're going to take a look at Lockhart's here. Like I said, we're going to talk about his Machiavellianism, because while it is a term that I've encountered before, it was not one that I remembered from school as far as diving into too deeply. We talked more about, the more, I don't want to call them surface levels, but we did talk about narcissistic personality disorder. We did talk about psychopathy. We did talk about sociopathy and things like that. But Machiavellianism, this was a fun episode for me, just from a learning standpoint. So let's dig in a little bit. But to kind of close out my thought on Lockhart and Umbridge, we are going to revisit these two, like I said, in a compare and contrast when we get into Order of the Phoenix. But that's quite a ways away from now. Anyway, Machiavellianism in psychology is a personality trait characterized by manipulativeness, deceitfulness, a strong focus on self-interest, and the tendency to use others as a means to an end. People high in Machiavellianism are often strategic thinkers who are willing to manipulate, deceive, and exploit others to achieve their goals, showing little empathy or concern for morality. Which, on the surface, to me, sounded a lot like narcissistic personality disorder. So we dug in because I wanted to see what's the difference between the two. So, narcissistic personality disorder is a mental health condition where a person has a persistent pattern of grandiosity an excessive need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. People with this disorder often have an inflated sense of their own importance and may exploit others to achieve their goals. Despite appearing very confident, they can be very sensitive to criticism and may struggle with unstable relationships and low self-esteem beneath their outward arrogance. So, I gave you narcissistic personality disorder. We just had the definition for Machiavellianism. Here's the key differences between the two in as straightforward terms as I could get for you. Machiavellianism is a personality trait characterized by manipulativeness, strategic calculation, and a focus on gaining actual power and control, often using deception and exploitation without concern for morality or empathy. People high in Machiavellianism tend to be cool-headed, cynical, and focused on long-term goals, prioritizing effectiveness over appearing likable. Narcissistic personality disorder, however, is a clinical personality disorder marked by grandiosity, an inflated sense of self-importance, a strong need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. Narcissists seek attention and validations to feel superior, are often emotionally reactive, and their behavior is driven by fragile self-esteem underneath their arrogance. They desire perception of power and status rather than power itself, with more immediate emotionally driven behaviors. So in short, Machiavellians seek actual power through cold calculation and manipulation, while narcissists seek the perception of power and admiration fueled by emotional needs and insecurity. Machiavellians tend to be more strategic and less emotionally reactive. Narcissists are more focused on status and attention and can be emotionally volatile. You cannot be emotionally volatile if you're actually strategizing and implementing like a Machiavellian would. Starting to see the difference. Now I asked it, what historical figures or important figures, even if they're still alive, exhibit these behaviors? So let's look at the Machiavellian. Niccolo Machiavelli, the Italian Renaissance political philosopher and diplomat, author of The Prince, whose work on political power and realpolitik established the term Machiavellian for cunning and strategic manipulation. Realpolitik, R-E-A-L-P-O-L-I-T-I-K as one word, is a practical and pragmatic approach to politics and diplomacy where decisions are made based on realistic assessments of power, national interests, and achievable outcomes rather than on moral, ethical, or ideological considerations. It prioritizes the effective use of power and the pursuit of a country's strategic advantages, often requiring flexibility, adaptability, and sometimes ruthless tactics to maintain balance and security. Had to go on a side trip here, so you're coming with me. Realpolitik. A simple way to think about realpolitik is that it focuses on what works in real-world politics rather than what should work based on ideals. In short, I'm going to put a disclaimer here. I am simply reading information that my AI ChatGPT-esque tool Perplexity gave me. The references for all of this are in my show notes. I am not here to piss anybody off. I am here simply to educate on this, but we are going to be diving into politics a little bit, specifically what's going on currently in the United States in October 2025. Okay? I'm just reading. I am not voicing my personal opinion. I am not shaming anybody for their personal opinion. This is the real world difference in a way that you all can understand. In short, Project 2025, that Project 2025 is realpolitik. And being a liberal is not, is definitely not. Yes, I did dive quite deeply into the rabbit hole on this one because I had never heard the term realpolitik before. And I wanted to know what the real world difference is. And this is what Perplexity gave me, like I said. So, that I threw that in under Niccolo Machiavelli. There are two more examples of a Machiavellian personality type. The next one is Huey Long Jr. He was a Louisiana governor from 1928 to 1932, and the senator from Louisiana from 1932 until 1935 when he was assassinated. Known for populist appeal combined with ruthless political tactics and manipulation, embodying the Machiavellian principle that the ends justify the means. And finally, our third example is Richard Nixon. 37th U.S. president, often cited as a modern Machiavellian for his strategic use of political power, secrecy, and deception, most famously connected to the Watergate scandal. Okay, so for those of you who are old enough, I was born during Nixon's administration. I was born in 1971. And I believe his inauguration was January of that year. So I was born into the Nixon administration. I have no clue what this man was about. So for any of you out there who are old enough to know about politics and understand politics and were alive as, let's say, later teenager, junior, senior in high school, up into young adulthood, you remember what it was like under Richard Nixon. He was Machiavellian. Now we're going to look at narcissistic personality disorder, and this one's going to piss a lot of people off because our top example is Donald Trump. Former, meaning his previous term, and current U.S. president, widely discussed in psychology and pop culture for narcissistic traits such as grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. If you look at all of the things that Trump has done in this term, the one he was elected to in November 2024, in this term, when you look at everything he has done, and the definition of narcissistic personality disorder, he does not give two shits about anything. About running this country, nothing. He is narcissistic personality disorder. It's all about perception for him. Just as we talked about the difference. Machiavellians want actual power. Narcissists want the perception of the power. They don't care about having the power. They just want people to think they're powerful. Another one on the list, not ironically, in fact, was Adolf Hitler. Historically diagnosed retrospectively with narcissistic personality disorder traits marked by grandiosity, exploitative behavior, and extreme self-importance. And then the final example of that topic is Howard Hughes, the notorious business magnate known for narcissistic behaviors, including obsession with control and status. So, just to round this out for you a little bit, we have Gilderoy Lockhart as an example of both when you really see it. He exhibits the Machiavellian ideals of wanting power, writing all of his books. He wants people to know or to think that he has done those things. But at the same time, the Cornish pixies come to mind. That stupidity and that arrogance would fall under, for me anyway, the narcissistic personality disorder. But I wanted to look at a character in Harry Potter who personifies narcissism, since we've already put Lockhart in the Machiavellian pile. And I know a lot of you out there are not going to like this, and I do apologize, but Draco Malfoy. He exhibits a classic narcissistic traits with his excessive need for admiration, his entitlement, his lack of empathy, and desire for social dominance. He frequently manipulates and belittles others to maintain his perceived superiority in status. Think about how Draco treats Crabbe and Goyle. Not how he treats Harry, Ron, and Hermione, or anybody else. Think about how Draco Malfoy treats Crabbe and Goyle, and it makes more sense that he would be an example of a narcissistic personality disorder. His need for admiration. My father knows the best people, and he's, spouting this shit off to all the Slytherins who already know who Lucius Malfoy is. His entitlement. My father will hear about this. My father is connected with the best people. His lack of empathy. He doesn't give a shit. He really doesn't. He just uses Crabbe and Goyle. And how often he manipulates and belittles him. Those of you familiar with the story remember what Draco was doing in Half-Blood Prince and how he treated Crabbe and Goyle in that book. Draco is classic narcissist. That was a lot. I'm not going to lie. That was a lot this week. The information I know was a lot more intense than I expected when I set out to write this episode and do all my research for it. But I think it's a good lesson to learn. And when I get excited about learning something new, I love sharing it with everybody. So I thought this would be a good episode to talk to, get some real serious, legit psychology going on and what these things mean and what they look like. Because especially with narcissism, just like, autism, I've been seeing a lot of this lately online where people are saying, oh, everybody's a little autistic. No. And not everybody is narcissistic. A lot of people have traits that tend to be autism or tend to be narcissistic. But those are just little pieces. Those are just little bits of it that when you put the whole together, when you're reading through the DSM, for those who are trained and educated and licensed to make official diagnoses like this, you have to have more than just 2 or 3 traits to get an official diagnosis of autism, to get an official diagnosis of narcissism. And I think those 2 terms and the mentality of everybody's a little narcissistic, everybody's a little autistic. No, you can have some of those traits, but absolutely not everybody is autistic. Absolutely not everybody is narcissistic. Okay? So, that one is something that has really been bothering me as of late, and I felt this was a great episode to sit down and talk about this in more in depth, especially when I got into the Machiavellianism. Ooh, heard the term, but I have no clue what that's about. So we dove into it, and there we go. Like I said, when we get into Order of the Phoenix, we are going to compare and contrast, because yes, there are similarities between Lockhart and Umbridge, but there are some differences too, and she has a completely different psychological profile. Okay, yes, I would probably I don't think I would necessarily put her into either category, but we'll find out. I think she's more just it's I wouldn't say it's about the power for her. I mean, because it is about the power. But anyway, it's getting late. We've come to the end of the episode. We'll dive more into that when we get to Order of the Phoenix, and we'll circle back around to Lockhart, compare and contrast. Until then, this was definitely more than I expected when I set out to write this episode. So we're going to wrap things up. We're going to take a break. We're going to take a breather. We're going to watch something funny. We're going to listen to nice calming music, whatever it is, because we dove deep into some of this week. So join me next week when we dive into Chapter 7, Mudbloods and Murmurs. Until then, just stay away from Lockhart as best you can, okay? Okay.